Basically, what we're doing is bringing together people that work across the spectrum of data-informed design, engineering, and policy for catalytic, candid, open-hearted conversations to share their really practical, tangible experience and examples around how they're using and applying data in their work to inform better design practice, better policy outcomes, and to share some of this experience. Because in the work that we do at Place Intelligence, we work across a pretty broad spectrum of clients in private practice and corporates, with big brands and with lots of design and engineering practices and government agencies. And so we see this really broad spectrum of challenges and ways of working. And we really wanted to bring that diversity of perspective out into the open and try and bring it up on stage.
Hi, Smart Community friends, and welcome to this bonus episode of the Smart Community Podcast. We will be kicking off Mobility March next week, but this week I wanted to share with you this fantastic conversation that I had with Bonnie Shaw. Bonnie is the co-founder of Place Intelligence, a geo-AI startup focused on democratizing access to big data to support evidence-based design, policy, and decision-making. Bonnie has a very varied background in landscape architecture, urban design, and game design. And in her previous role as the Smart City Practice Lead at the City of Melbourne, Bonnie helped to establish and lead Australia's first and multi-award-winning Smart Cities team. In this episode, we talk about the importance of building literacy and critical thinking around smart concepts in our smart communities, and Bonnie's framework for meaningful change that looks at toolset, skill set, and mindset. Bonnie tells us about Place Intelligence and some of the projects they've been working on, including the Data Informed Design Conference, which will be held in Melbourne on the 23rd and 24th of March in 2023. Tickets are out now, so click the link in the show notes or the episode description to get yours right now, and I'll see you there. Bonnie and I finish our chat discussing the emerging trend of opportunities for engagement to help people understand the things that are influencing our lives, plus how game design helps us to approach community engagement. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Bonnie. How are you today?
I'm so well, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
I am so excited to have you on the podcast. Let's just jump straight in, and can you tell us about your background and what you're passionate about?
So I'm trained as a landscape architect and urban designer and worked in the field for close to 10 years, probably 6 or 7 years. And before I designed a game with some friends, and we used to, when I was working in community design, we did a lot of work around community engagement, and we would go into communities and hand out, back in those days, disposable cameras and get people to go around their communities and take photos of things that were really meaningful to them and use those as a way of engaging people in conversation about what they cared about in their current places and how that can inform the future of their places. And with a few friends early on, I transformed that into a game that people could play online, and it blew up into this pretty big experience that had tens of thousands of people playing in hundreds of cities around the world, just as kind of locative technologies were starting to become much more accessible. And so it was a bit of a launch pad for me. It took me all over the world and gave me these incredible opportunities, including a fellowship at the Institute for Contemporary Art in London, and then a fellowship at the Sensible Cities Lab at MIT. And so from there, I stayed in technology, working in product development and innovation practice with groups as varied as Deloitte and Coca-Cola, Hilton Hotels, NASA, the White House, and got to do all these pretty incredible things with some absolutely amazing people. And then came back to Australia 10 years ago now to do some work with the Foundation for Young Australians, supporting young people in accessing resources around social impact and social change and entrepreneurship and technology. And then the City of Melbourne made a pretty significant change in some of the ways they were operating. They set up Australia's first Smart Cities team, and I was brought in there as the practice lead to help establish and lead a range of the programs there, and come back to my roots as a designer and cities person. And it's a pretty varied and somewhat ad hoc kind of career. And but the through line through all of it that I find is this kind of way of leveraging emerging technologies and community participation to help people and places reach their full potential. And so that is what I remain really passionate about, and I'm really excited to do more of that in the work that I'm doing now.
That's awesome. And yeah, we'll definitely talk about the work that's happening right now. But yeah, thanks so much for sharing. That's such an interesting kind of background. And I think, we all learn so much from those kind of chance experiences, right? And the people that you get to meet, and then then we can come back and bringing all that stuff that we've learned along the way. It's so amazing. Not that it was really chance, you probably worked really hard for it, but just those other experiences that you would have had to get that, if you took just the traditional route of, I'm a landscape architect and I'm going to do this, you took a chance, right? To be able to then, it could have gone one way or the other or both at the same time sometimes. It's
and it
weird.
Did.
Yeah.
It often did.
Yeah, you're just like, it's going to go this way. Oh, no, there we go again. No, that's really interesting. And I think people really like to hear that as well, particularly I think young people trying to work out what the hell they're going to do and thinking that, I'm picked, I'm going to be an engineer, so this is what it means. No one knows what that means anymore. It doesn't, you do choose your own adventure, and people often say you forge your own path, but there's not a path there, right? It's not a path ahead of you, but there's only one kind of behind you, and you can choose which way to go. But again, a lot of those decisions are made for you, but you are the leader and you're the one directing along the way. So yeah, anyway, we'll go broad and then we're going to talk about what you're up to now. So what is a smart community to you?
I kind of go back to my roots on this. It's where everyone has access to opportunity. I have always really focused on building literacy around change, and whether that's kind of you're getting a new park in your neighborhood and you need to know what the decisions are that are being made around that. It may have no technology component whatsoever, but a smart community is one where people have the opportunity to participate in the decision-making process that shapes their environment. And increasingly, I think that same approach has to underpin a technology-enabled environment where people need to be able to participate, but they need to do it in a way that is literate. And so they need to understand the platforms that are involved, the power structures behind them, and be able to evaluate their effectiveness for the situations that they're in. And I think because so many of the systems that we engage with now are so deeply complex and have so many hidden layers to them, that it's very difficult for people to have literacy, which is not just knowledge, it's actually being able to kind of deeply understand them and explain them to others. Yeah, I think having that ability to fully participate and evaluate and have choice.
Yeah, I really like that. Just building literacy as we have to build literacy as we're building these smart communities, and it's evolving as we go. Before we need to read and write, and that's how we participated in society. And thinking back, this is a bit random tangent, but when I was in Korea, them explaining to me that when they the language is quite young, Korean language quite young, and the king, I think it was Sejong at the time, and he was also very progressive, and he had paternity leave back in the day and stuff like that. But he noticed, that there was so much illiteracy in the community, so he created this language that was really easy to learn. Lucky for me as well, because then I could learn it too. But then now it's a similar thing where we have to go, well, we can't just keep throwing technology or, even government processes, systems, services. Oh, well, the service is available. Why is no one using it? That's not a failure of the community, right? That's a failure of, they're not being literate in what the service is or whatever it is, or maybe it doesn't serve the right purpose. And it's really about that, having lots of conversations about that. And whatever we want to call it, too, like, I don't know what the term is that isn't buzzwordy, but like that customer or that community focus. So putting them in the center, because we don't do that now, right? If I need to, I don't know, buy a car or something like that, I have to go here to get that, here to get that, here to get that. Or if I need to update my address, here to here. Whereas actually, if we think about the user or the center or the customer at the center, it's a completely different way to operate and different governance model as well. But then it's like building that literacy around it is really important. And if we actually put as much value on that as the technology or the, whatever it is, as well, if we had that at the same kind of level, then I think that's when we would really, power forward. And because, I think we're progressively going forward and iterating, but it takes that focus from, people like yourselves, and even talking to Tegan about, City of Melbourne, and then obviously a lot of things you probably set up, building the literacy along the way, really, really key.
Yeah. The framework I use now with most things actually, but kind of structured around our work and in some of the training courses that I deliver, is a framework that looks at toolset, skill set, and mindset. And so toolset refers to the technology, the infrastructure, the kind of defined process that we might have in place. And in and of itself, without skilled people to engage with it, isn't super useful. When you pair toolset with skilled people, you can get some great results. But the introduction of any new kind of advanced tool or new process requires people to build capability, skills, literacy in how that thing works. And they need to be able to evaluate its effectiveness for the particular challenge that they're working on. And then even when you have those two things, if you've got great tools, highly skilled people that know how to manipulate them to get great results, if they don't land in a culture that values the output and is prepared to act on it, then you hit another brick wall. And so having those three things together of tools, skills, and culture or mindset is critical for making any kind of meaningful change. And that sort of crystallization of that framework for me has come through working across massive change programs in government, in the nonprofit sector, in like big corporates all over the world. And it's that same thing you see all the time. People are pretty happy to invest in shiny new tools and will a lot of the time invest in some training and skills. But that culture piece, because it's kind of hidden and shadowy, often gets left out. And so it's really important to understand those three things.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like local governments and state governments, it's a similar thing with this. If you're building a smart community strategy or whatever, it's like, okay, well, this is all great and there's some great stuff in here, but if we don't actually address the mindset issue, then it's just going to sit on a shelf. Or you might have a little bit of success here and there. You might be able to do stuff here and there, but it's the pockets of innovation or whatever, but it's not that overall, really holistic kind of view. Because if you just have smart stuff over here or technology or whatever, then you can't actually make that real change. And I often talk about it's a bit different, I suppose, but if we're on the same vein as like mindset, but the possible brain. So like when we're going, oh, well, no, this isn't possible. We've never done it like this before. It's always been done this way. No, how could that possibly happen? We've got like this impossible brain. So everything just like seems really, really difficult. And we can't push forward, right? Because we're in this like state of like overwhelm, like, holy shit. But then once we go, oh, well, but what if it was possible? What if we could do it like this? What are the steps that we need to take? It's still just as hard to bloody get there because there's all these steps in the way, but you're actually starting with this mindset of being the possible brain. And then then that's when you can start making a meaningful change, because otherwise you're just stuck in this like, oh my God, I don't know, I can't get out of this. And that's both in individual life, as we know, but then also like at that, kind of company, government, community level as well.
So I actually spent the end of 2019 and most of 2020 retraining as a human potential coach, which was focused around biohacking and using data basically to understand our biological systems to manage stress. Because there's incredible research around the impacts of long-term stress on our decision-making capability. And when people get into a stressed state, a physiologically stressed state, it actually changes how we think and therefore how we act, and predisposes human brains to being more reactive, more defensive, more fixed in their thinking. So physiologically less able to move into a generative, creative, collaborative space. And so when you think about the kind of major challenges that we're facing and the ways that we need to work to solve them, which is fundamentally collaborative and generative and kind of adaptive, that stressed state physiologically, which is a chemical state, is actually putting up barriers in how our bodies function to allow us to do that. And so I always come back to tool skills mindset. There's a set of skills that I believe that people fundamentally need to learn to manage that, so that we can actually go into some of these big challenges in a optimal physiological state to be able to address them, so that we're not kind of regressing into these fixed mindsets that prevent us from doing that work well.
I think that's so relevant, and good on you for doing that just before we just had a massive stressful situation.
Well, I'd come out of doing some pretty major change work in an organization and had started seeing the effects of these kind of long-term stressful periods on people. And I was like, why are people reacting in these ways? And I started, and it had a serious effect on my health. I ended up really unwell. And through my recovery, I went through some really deep research and actually found that all of the city resilience work, which I'm sure you're familiar with, of recovering quickly from acute shock and withstanding long-term strain, that work is actually based on the work of a Hungarian endocrinologist called Hans Sale, word for word, around his early work in human physiological stress. And so the way he talks about recovery from stress is the words that are used in city resilience work. And I have no kind of medical background whatsoever, and I found it really hard to get into the science of it when I was trying to chart a path through my recovery. And as soon as I found that link and found the link to kind of the complex urban systems work, I was able to suddenly just had this light bulb moment of oh, wow, it's actually the same thing. This is amazing. And I went so deep into it and found it absolutely fascinating. And I think it's an absolute fundamental skill that we need to get better at.
That is so interesting. Just again, linking that human, individual with the community or the city systems, it just shows how much we cannot forget about the individuals and the humans, and even our, individual things are happening in our bodies. I just think, because often, we can talk about these kind of, oh, well, in theory, we can do this, that, and the other, and technology is going to save the world, blah, blah, blah. But if we don't address the human fundamentals, then we just can't, progress forward. And we know that, but I think it's also really interesting, you finding that parallel for you, for other people that, that wouldn't make sense necessarily because they're not working in cities, right? But that parallel just, again, so interesting again. And it really goes to show how, I often say, we can do more than one thing, right? We don't have to just be this or that or whatever. But then bringing those things together, I think you just find those little things. Oh, well, I do that in this thing, which is completely unrelated, but it makes sense there. And actually they took that, or, they borrowed that from that theory from there or whatever. I just find that really interesting, because those cross-pollinations and that kind of, weird connections and things like that, I think that's where real creativity and magic and beauty really happens. And it really is exciting.
Yeah.
Okay. It's been great, actually. I really have enjoyed this conversation, but I want to talk about the projects and things that you've been working on. Tell us about your company and what you've been up to.
Yeah, great. We so I'm one of the co-founders in a business called Place Intelligence, We're a data analytics startup. We've spent the last 4 years pretty quietly building some very advanced data processing tools and a data visualization platform that allows anyone in the built environment professions to essentially self-select a site and produce a series of data models that help you understand how people use places over time. We've been collaborating really closely with most of the big design and engineering firms across Australia, lots of state government agencies and local governments, and getting ready to do a big launch in a few weeks to really open up access to some of these tools, which is pretty exciting after many years of hard work.
Very cool. Now, okay, so we're thinking about a place, people maybe that aren't in placemaking. What are some of the data points that are really interesting, and then also used for decision making around places?
So what we're really trying to do is help people understand how places function, how places work. And in design practice, as a landscape architect, we're trained to go in before we do any kind of intervention into a site or a place and learn as much as we can about that place. And so we might do a bunch of desktop research, look at a bunch of satellite imagery, go out and interview the community and have a walk around. But in that work, there's only so much time you can spend in a place to really get to know it. And so what our data allows, so we're using a range of activity data points. We blend GPS, connected car, public open data, and satellite data, and geospatial data, and a whole range of different big data sets to help us understand activity and mobility. And so we can go in and produce data models that give a view of the patterns of place over multiple years by hour of day, day of week, month of year, that really let you understand the pattern and rhythm of a place and reveal insights that just aren't possible when you're only spending a short amount of time there. What it also does is helps to reveal different views or cut down on your own sort of perceived bias of how a place works. So what we find when designers take our models into community consultation, for example, they're able to start with this sort of neutral baseline. And often people will say, yep, that's exactly what I thought was happening through my frame of reference. But it can also help to reveal a whole range of other things that are occurring that you may not have seen in your own personal experience. And so I think to kind of throw back to this lens around building literacy, what it does is kind of open up people's lens of perspective and helps to build a greater understanding of how places are functioning over time, kind of across a much broader spectrum.
And what type of insights do you draw from that? So I imagine it's, movement, maybe sentiment, that type of thing. Is that the type of thing you're looking for?
Yeah, we really focus on movement and mobility at the moment. So where places are busiest and when, and what those patterns of activation are. We can then tie that to events and assets and other things that might trigger those patterns. And so we can start to interpret that data. We look at dwell time, so where a place is most magnetic. We perform a range of automated calculations now around movement and place. We do a lot of work in the transport space and understanding the relationship between movement and mobility and destination and magnetism. We look at the catchments of places, so where audiences that use a particular place come from, how local a place is compared to its visitor profile. We can then look at the utilization of particular assets, so buildings, parks, roads, train stations, waterways, any particular precinct that you might like to define. And then we have a range of other models that help us understand the connectivity between places and what their kind of connections and cross visits might look like to give an understanding of journey sequencing, so how people move through, between, to, from, and within places, which can be incredibly useful for all sorts of decision making around wayfinding and particular design decisions or transport planning, network demand decisions. And so we have this kind of series of base models now that we've built in partnership with some of the most talented engineers around and placemakers and architects and landscape architects that have been refined over multiple years now as part of a design and decision-making process. So we've really tried to understand that design or policy or decision-making process and understand where the data fits in as a kind of fulcrum for decision-making and really hone our products to align with those requirements. So yeah, it's been a really interesting process of learning and continually learning from some of these absolutely incredible design practitioners that are, making huge decisions about how our places should function and look and the kinds of infrastructure and assets that we get to interact with. And we have a pretty strong belief in the work that we do that those decisions should increasingly be informed by data, but that practitioners should be literate in how to interpret that data and evaluate that data to integrate it into their design and decision-making processes, not be driven by it, so that they're using it as an input and that it doesn't become the kind of defining rule for it.
Yeah, and thinking about, again, the tools, like you said earlier, it's a tool, right? And then you could then be literate enough to then be able to use that to help explain design with the community, I imagine, is a huge part of that as well. So again, you're interacting with the community to get their stories, and that's, again, data, right? But yeah, then again, having that tool at your fingertips that you can use to as an input into the decision making, I think that's really, really fascinating. And I think you were talking earlier about the right kind of timing or the right intervention at policy level, is at strategy level. That is so key, and I've been reminded of recently. You can have the best idea in the world, but if you haven't figured out how the government makes decisions about it, when they do, they need this information first, then that, then this, that, and the other, then you have no hope, right, of getting the right, because you're at the wrong time. Oh, it's too late. All those decisions have already been made, or it's too early. Actually, they need really high level information to pop it in there, but they don't need the detailed stuff because otherwise it gets lost and, we don't end up with it at all. And it's something that, you only learn by doing, right? You only learn by doing those kind of tests and trials or collaborations with these agencies to learn that. And each one is slightly different as well. So it's always, it's a learning process. And that IP of knowing that is really, really valuable.
My mom worked in organizational design, and she taught me a little kind of tool that she used in a bunch of her work. I'm sure it's kind of very commonly known, but it's about understanding above the line and below the line operations. And so above the line is kind of all the stuff that's written down, there's documented process for it. And it's the stuff that, you can pick up a manual and follow step by step. And below the line is the stuff that isn't written down. It's the call Gary, he'll know what to do. And all of those things where in places I've worked in, you don't actually get stuff done unless you hang around the elevator and catch people at the right moment. You learn pretty quickly that if you're there at 11:42, you'll bump into the 5 people that you need to see that day to get a decision made. And often large bureaucratic organizations have a lot of, they're like icebergs. There's a bunch of stuff that's above the line, but actually a huge amount of it happens below the line. And probably massive tangent, but a lot of those organizations really struggled during COVID and that switch to online and remote, where a lot of that kind of institutional knowledge was held by the relationships between people that would bump into each other. And when that was taken away and became quite hidden, it became really difficult, particularly for people kind of coming into organizations during that period where they just had no visibility into that stuff. It becomes a really challenge for organizations to actually get stuff done.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I don't think it's that much of a tangent because we're going to move, we're moving into, it's going to be a hybrid world, right? I don't think that's very controversial, but I mean, it will depend on the organization, everything like that. But you have to lead differently in those, and it's not the same. And I think we expected people, and obviously it was, we had to keep going forward, but you can't expect people to have those skill sets because they've never done it before. And it's interesting because some of it is not just, one, not the same, but two, it's a bit unexpected, and different people are going to work differently when they're in the office, when they're at home, all those type of things as well. And it can't be just like this one size fits all. Yeah, it's a really, it's going to, in the future, that's going to be something that we've recognized now, but it will be, we have to address it because otherwise we won't be able to continue at this kind of pace, and it will just continue to increase as well.
Well, I think people, during COVID, everyone just sort of reactively adapted, in a lot of cases, pretty well in a time of significant crisis. And now that we're out of that acute phase, there's this opportunity to really consciously address some of those interactions and look at them as opportunities about how you leverage the unique characteristics of different types of situations to produce different types of outcomes. And I think that looking at it as a design challenge is really exciting because there are amazing ways that you can address it. I would encourage my husband when he was doing calls with his team during COVID. I was like, if you're doing it, if everyone's on the phone, why don't you go out for a walk? Ask people to be in a green space in their 5K radius or whatever it needs to be, so that you're actually lean into some of the opportunities that come with this shift in how you're interacting and start thinking about the different ways you can take advantage of the benefits. Even though it's really hard and there's lots of challenges, there are still kind of really interesting opportunities to be had out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just those little, which may seem, insignificant, but again, it's really shifting people's mindsets, okay, now it's a 10 o'clock meeting, cool, it's my walking meeting, I can get otherwise you just, end up sitting at your desk and you think, oh, that's not going to make a difference, but it really, really can. And I think more and more of that, and then those tiny iterations, particularly during that time, things that I didn't think I would ever care about ever, you start going, oh, wow, I can't believe that. I can't even think of an example, but just oh, wow, now we can have 2 people over. I don't know, something like that. Now I can do that. It's wow, oh, that's right. But I want to talk about, first of all, I do want to go to the future, but I want to talk about, the very near future to begin with. Tell us what's happening in March.
Yes. In March, we are hosting what has turned into a pretty significant event called the Data Informed Design Conference. And it's going to be held in Melbourne on the 23rd and 24th of March at the Capitol Theatre, the incredible Capitol Theatre, which is worth a visit in and of itself if you have never been there. I'm told there will be quite a spectacular light show to open proceedings. And basically what we're doing is bringing together people that work across the spectrum of data-informed design, engineering, and policy for catalytic, candid, open-hearted conversations to share their really practical, tangible experience and examples around how they're using and applying data in their work to inform better design practice, better policy outcomes, and to share some of this experience. Because in the work that we do at Place Intelligence, we work across a pretty broad spectrum of clients in private practice and corporates, with big brands and with lots of design and engineering practices and government agencies. And so we see this really broad spectrum of challenges and ways of working. And we really wanted to bring that diversity of perspective out into the open and try and bring it up on stage. And so we have a series of what we're calling keynote conversations between some of the world's most incredible practitioners. We'll open with Sarah Williams, who is the head of the Civic Data Design Lab at MIT, in conversation on stage with Dan Hill, who is now the head of design at the Melbourne School of Design. We'll have Catherine Ma, who's the outgoing CEO of Wikipedia. The last 10 years, she's been running the world's largest public forum for knowledge sharing with some of the most kind of advanced technological advances, but also one of the sort of most dedicated focus around building a much greater diversity around contributing authors and editors. And Catherine will be having a conversation with Seb Chan, who's the CEO of Acme, who's spent his career building these incredible public spaces for interacting with art and culture, and often using a lot of technology as part of that mediation. And so we're trying to bring these really interesting, incredibly accomplished people on stage to have conversations with each other, and we all get to eavesdrop.
That sounds amazing. It's going to be great. I can't wait.
The second day, we're then putting it into practice. So we've got a series of walking tours and workshops lined up. You'll get behind the scenes access to some of the largest and most significant public projects in Melbourne at the moment. Our friends at the City of Melbourne will be delivering a walking tour of the Green Line project, which is going to significantly transform the North Bank of the Yarra. We'll also have another tour going through some of the incredible work that's happening at the Melbourne Arts Precinct with their urban wilding project and the new gallery. RMIT will be doing some work around their social innovation district and looking at the public realm kind of enhancements that are happening there and introducing a range of their partners in that space. So it's going to be pretty great, I think, for people that are interested in data and technology and how that intersects with design and city shaping and policy making. We'll all get to nerd out for a couple of days.
I think it's going to be really great, and just the space and bringing in that creativity and art, and it's just and having, like you said, those conversations happening that we get to eavesdrop into. It's going to be great. I look forward to it.
We're looking forward to seeing you on stage with some of the very best engineers and data scientists in town. It's going to be a good one.
I know. I'm really looking forward to that. It's going to be great. Like, having spent a little bit of time in Melbourne recently, I think it's just going to be, bringing those people together, having those conversations, doing something, and it's going to be fun, right? Like, I'm excited for the fun because you need some more fun, right?
It's going to be a blast. Every single person on stage are so incredible. They're just absolutely phenomenal and accomplished people, but delightful. So it's going to be great.
So can people still get tickets?
Tickets are on sale. did.placeintelligence.ai is the place to go. And tickets are on sale. I would encourage people to get in quickly because we're about to open up access to a bunch of those walking tours and workshops, and you must be a ticket holder to get access to those. The spaces in them are quite limited, and I expect them to go pretty fast. So if you're thinking about getting a ticket, do it quick so that you have the opportunity to get into some of those tours.
Yeah, cool. Well, we'll put the link in the show notes so people can click away and register if they're interested. And thanks. I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to it a lot. Okay, well, let's quickly zoom to the future. What are the emerging trends that people aren't talking about enough?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think we get really caught up in talking about the most recent technological advances, the new tools. But I really do think that there's always these kind of hidden elements around the skills and the mindset of the culture that we need to give more attention. And so while there are kind of incredible new AI tools out there that everyone can access now, very quickly, I think, certainly in my world and the content that I get exposed to, there's a growing conversation around how to use them effectively, what the guardrails are around their guidance, and particularly the sort of power structures and funding structures that sit behind them that are guiding their development. And so I think that that's the stuff that I'll always come back to around kind of the literacy in the community. writ large around the tools that are emerging so quickly to influence and shape how we interact with the world.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, it is that literacy, is, again, building that literacy, like, circling back to the beginning. There's all these new tools will continue to become available, but how do we ask the right questions to really critically analyze what we should use the tools for, what we shouldn't use the tools for, who should use them, who shouldn't use them? How do we put that lens over? Because even when I was doing my Masters of Data Science, right, there was tools that you could use, instead of coding from scratch, like using something like Python, coding from scratch, you could use a tool, I don't know, one of them's called Rapid Miner, I think, which is like, data mining tool or whatever. And you can kind of drag and drop modules that then will do the thing that you need to do. And that was all well and good. And particularly when I did a machine learning, like advanced course, essentially, when I went into there, they were talking about all these things. And I went, oh, I haven't used MATLAB for like many, many years. And I was like, oh, I have to learn that language first. And then asking the lecturer, he was kind of like, oh, well, no, you shouldn't be doing this course until you've done this other one. And I was like, well, you let me enroll in this. But anyway, but also I was in, right? So I was like, okay, I cannot research my way out of this. I have to actually learn how to use this tool. I couldn't use, the Rapid Miner, drag and drop or whatever. I had to learn how to use it. And fortunately, I was able to do that. But I think about these other tools, like the Rapid Miner, for example, I could use it and I would get an outcome. But if I didn't know why I got that outcome, what it was doing, also even just being transparent, the fact that I've used that, because it's also going to have its own inherent, probably not bias isn't the word, but it's going to have its own, oh, well, this is the way this thing operates. Oh, I'm aware that the data scientist hasn't actually made a decision about this. The machine made that decision because, the module that they used or whatever. So there's those things. And I often thought about, I'm like, oh, well, I can get an answer, but if I don't know why, and I couldn't adjust the answer to add some bits and pieces in, then that answer still might be valid for a certain purpose, but not everything. And really, how do we tag and, those type of things? I often thought about that transparency. And then even thinking about things like statistics, which I love. So I was doing lots of stats. And again, it is numbers, it's formulas, it's like there were tools, but it was pure kind of, math or whatever. And it's not, this sounds weird, but like it's a quite simple math once you learn it, right? It's not super complex, once you learn it, it's quite simple math and bits and pieces. But you can still, and you put your bias in it because you choose, oh, I'm going to use this over this. Oh, I tried that, it gave me this. Okay, no, I want this. You still add all that in. And then you might even overcorrect because I'm like, oh, well, I don't want my bias saying that, I don't know, something that I really care about, like, oh, well, it's showing that women are X, Y, Z or whatever. So all of that is really, really, really just like going to that literacy piece. And so how do you do that on a community level? It's crazy. But I think that critical lens has to be applied as we start to see, well, not even start to see, we know these tools, things have been happening for many, many years, but as these tools become more and more accessible, which again, great, there'll be some great innovations out of it that people hadn't thought of before, blah, blah, blah. But what is that critical lens that we need to add to all of these things? Because otherwise we can't trust everything the same, essentially.
Yeah, well, and increasingly, right? Like there's a conscious effort to erode trust in public institutions that's happening from bad actors. But I like, for me, it always comes back to literacy, but having spent some time in government, our elected officials make decisions based around the social license that is afforded them by their constituents, their community. And so I think it's absolutely critical. And the term for it is the Overton window, the kind of theoretical term, which is awesome theory. If anyone's interested in understanding kind of social license theory, the Overton window is a great thing to research. But understanding kind of how you build the literacy in the community to give our elected officials the social license or encourage or force change at that kind of highest institutional level is really important. And certainly in the work that we did at the City of Melbourne, one of the programs that sat in my team was the Melbourne Knowledge Week Festival, and which was the city's innovation festival. It was super fun. We'd got to do some awesome stuff. But the way I used to talk about it as a Trojan horse. It was this beautiful, shiny thing that got lots of people engaged. But we had these really deep mechanics behind it that was driving that interaction, which is all about exposing the community to some of the big challenges that were facing them now and into the future, to help build an understanding, build knowledge, and build literacy about those changes in a way that wasn't scary, in a way that was engaging and fun and quite lighthearted, so that as it started to become something that was having more influence in their lives, they had this kind of grounding with some confidence to be able to approach it in a way that wasn't hopefully going to be reactive and negative, and kind of help to support people to engage with really challenging issues with a more positive and generative and open-minded lens, so that we could build these platforms to support our decision makers to be more ambitious. And so, I really do think, if we come back to kind of that question of what isn't being talked about enough, what needs more focus, I think it really is around kind of building these opportunities for engagement to help people understand the things that are having influence in our lives, not from a kind of scary doom and gloom perspective, but from their mechanics, and build a real understanding about it. And for me personally, I think that data is one of the critical tools that lets us do that. And I really hope that the work that we're doing at Place Intelligence is contributing to that in a really positive way. And the event that we're running is a really clear demonstration of how we're committing to building those spaces to help build literacy, particularly in our profession.
Yeah, I think it's an imperative, I suppose, but we need to do it in creative ways. And I think that engagement piece is so important. And, obviously it gets talked about a lot, but I think thinking about it through that different lens of the mechanics and things like that, it's just, then, you can actually engage on a completely different level.
And that comes back to game design. So full circle, when we're talking about how you design really beautiful, engaging, fun games. And for me, games have to be fun. If it's not fun, then it's an interaction. But you kind of hold this dual purpose where you've got to have really strong mechanics that kind of shape rules and interactions in particular ways to an outcome. But you have to wrap it in something that's really beautiful and fun and engaging that people get joy out of. And so that's, I think, how I approach most things I try to do. I think I try and approach everything I do. I don't know if I always work, but that's the goal.
Well, Bonnie, it's been so great to have you on the podcast. I really, really enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to picking it up in March down in Melbourne. But I thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Just one last question. How can people connect with you?
Probably the best way is LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time there at the moment, or through the Place Intelligence website, which you can find me, placeintelligence.ai.
We will put all the links in the show notes. We'll put the link to the event as well. But thanks again for coming on the podcast, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Zoe, and thank you for all of the work you do in helping to build people's literacy about the evolutions in this space.
Thank you. It's a tough job. No, it's really fun, actually. I love it. I love it. It's fun. I just want to make it accessible for people, right? But again, not that we talk about this, but just the collaboration, I think, is so important. You can't do things on your own. That's why I love this format, because I get to talk to so many amazing people.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And we get to share. But anyway, better say goodbye. Have a great Sunday afternoon, and I will talk to you soon.
See you, mate. Thanks again.
Thanks, Bonnie.
The Smart Community podcast is brought to you by My Smart Community. If you're trying to deal with disruption, not sure what technologies to buy, need to facilitate genuine collaboration, then we can help. Email hello@mysmart.community or head to www.mysmart.community/consulting.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community/podcast. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community. You can also find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn and Twitter @SmartComHQ. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we would love for you to leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears and eyes, so thank you for your support. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.